Chicago's gang history is full of famous names: Vice Lords, Gangster Disciples, Black P. Stones. But hidden within those larger organizations were powerful factions that built their own reputations on the streets. One of those groups was known as the Gangster Stones. The Gangster Stones were a branch tied to the wider Black P. Stone movement, but they carved out their own identity through brutal turf battles and strategic expansion. Their rise began during a time when Chicago's neighborhoods were shifting rapidly and gangs were fighting for control of blocks, housing projects, and entire communities. One of the key figures behind their growth was a leader known as Mooseman. At the time, parts of the Pullman neighborhood were controlled by the Supreme Gangsters, a rival organization that dominated certain areas. But Mooseman saw that control as a challenge. Instead of backing down, Mooseman and his crew began confronting the gangsters directly. Through fights, intimidation, and relentless pressure, the Gangster Stones began pushing rivals out of key locations. Before long, they had built a strong presence around 104th and Corliss, and their influence spread into Corliss High School and the surrounding blocks. Their power continued expanding through North Pullman, stretching across multiple streets and neighborhoods. Parks, schools, and apartment complexes all became battlegrounds where control shifted between rival gangs. But the Gangster Stones weren't just active on the South Side. They would eventually establish a major foothold on Chicago's West Side, particularly inside the Henry Horner housing projects. Public housing developments like Henry Horner were dense environments where thousands of residents lived in a cluster of high-rise buildings, and gangs quickly realized these complexes were prime territory. Inside Henry Horner, the Gangster Stones established their headquarters in a building at 150 North Hermitage. On the streets, that location became known as the Fortress. From that base of operations, the Gangster Stones spread across nearby buildings and blocks, running operations from Lake Street to Washington Boulevard and controlling sections between Hermitage, Wolcott, and Damen. But with territory came conflict. The Henry Horner projects were already home to powerful groups like the conservative Vice Lords and renegade Vice Lords, and neither side wanted to give up control. As a result, the area became the scene of violent rivalries and constant tension between gangs. At the same time, the Gangster Stones developed a reputation for organization. Within the projects, they were able to control and operate a large and structured drug market, something that required coordination, leadership, and enforcement. Their story also intersected with one of the most famous figures in Chicago gang history, Jeff Fort, the leader of the Black P. Stone Nation. When Fort was released from prison in the mid-1970s, he began transforming parts of the Stone organization into a new group called the Rukns. Many Stone factions were invited to join this new movement. Fort even approached Mooseman and the Gangster Stones with the idea of bringing their faction into the Rukn organization. Mooseman respected Jeff Fort, but instead of fully joining, the Gangster Stones maintained their own structure while keeping ties with Fort's leadership. To maintain unity between these factions, Fort introduced something known as the Cold Soldier Army, a system meant to legitimize certain Stone groups and keep them connected under a broader ideology. The Gangster Stones became one of the groups recognized as legitimate under this structure, giving them status and influence among other Stone factions. Because of this certification, the Gangster Stones held a unique position. They were respected by both the traditional Black P. Stones and the newer Rukn movement, often acting as a bridge between the two during conflicts. Throughout the late 1970s and 1980s, the Gangster Stones continued expanding into different neighborhoods, including parts of Austin, North Lawndale, and other West Side communities. At times, they even formed temporary alliances with other gangs, including factions of the Vice Lords, though those alliances rarely lasted long in Chicago's constantly shifting gang politics. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Henry Horner projects and surrounding areas remained one of the most contested territories in the city, with multiple gangs battling for influence. Members came and went. Some flipped to rival organizations, others rose through the ranks. But the legacy of the Gangster Stones remained tied to their reputation for toughness, organization, and their ability to hold territory in some of Chicago's most dangerous environments. Their story is another reminder that Chicago's gang landscape wasn't just built by the major nations everyone knows today. It was also shaped by the factions, crews, and street leaders who fought block by block to build power. And the Gangster Stones were one of those crews that carved their name into Chicago's history.